Tonight, the government says it's working at pace to sanction those involved in the death of Alexei Navalny. His wife says he was poisoned and vows to fight for a free Russia. And as Navalny's spokesperson says, they've been told his body is going to be held for 2 weeks. The UK urges the Russian authorities to release it. New guidance from the government to ban mobile phones in schools, a sensible step, or as the teaching unions have called it, a non-policy for a non-problem. I'll be speaking to the schools minister, that's Damien Hinds. The business secretary launches a scathing attack on the former chairman of the post office. It's after Henry Staunton claimed he was told to stall giving compensation to victims of the Horizon scandal. Kemi Badenoch accused him of baseless attacks and says it's a blatant attempt to seek revenge. Deja vu in the Telegraph. They've reported on another poll which suggests the Conservatives would be better off if they dumped Rishi Sunak. I'll speak live to the woman who commissioned it, a long-standing party donor, Lady McAlpine. And with mobile phones in the headlines, we'll look back to a more innocent time. All that and more with Caroline Flintz and Robin Walker, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Alexei Navalny, Putin critic, key opposition figure, jailed on politically motivated charges. Well, last Friday, according to Russian prison authorities, he suffered sudden death syndrome in a remote Arctic prison. Now, since I'm already banned from Russia, I can probably get away with saying there are a lot of people who don't believe that is true. Well, it's now 3 days since we heard the news of Navalny's death. And what's actually happened since then? Honestly, not much. The US is considering additional sanctions on Russia, as is the UK. Rishi Sunak has said he's outraged. Donald Trump has compared Navalny's imprisonment to his own legal trials in the US. And there's been a lot more words than action, which, to be honest, is a predictable response that was probably predicted by Putin, giving him the security to commit such an outrageous and blatant act. And there's a wider point, too, on how the West deals with Russia. And by the West, really, I mean America, which remains deeply divided over how to respond to Putin's aggression. David Cameron, in his role as Foreign Secretary, is trying to convince the American right to keep backing Ukraine with money and arms. We've got an insight into how that's going down when a Trump ally told this programme that Cam would kiss her, a part of her body that I can't get away with saying without an American accent. And with an election on the horizon, America is likely to be less, not more likely, to keep pumping money into Ukraine. And perhaps the reality is we're reaching the limits of British influence here. Well, tonight the UK is calling for the Russian authorities to release Mr. Navalny's body, while his wife is vowing to work for a free Russia. Here's Sky's Moscow correspondent, Diana Magnay.
Yulia Navalnaya had always played the supporting role to her husband. He would rarely meet with Western leaders, but from exile and to avenge his death, she must. And now, just 4 days a widow, but with an extraordinary poise and steeliness, she has released this video message swearing to continue his fight.
I urge you to stand with me, to share not only the grief and endless pain that has confused us and will not let go. I ask you to share with me the rage, anger, hatred towards those who dared to kill our future.
Even as Navalny's mother, Ludmila, traipsed the frozen streets of Salakard in Russia's far north, demanding to see her son's body, which authorities say will not happen for at least another 2 weeks, Yulia promised to expose what had happened to him.
They are now hiding his body, not showing it to his mother, not giving it to them, but lying and waiting pathetically for the traces of another of Putin's Novichoks to disappear.
Scraps of evidence so far, live camera footage of an unusual nighttime convoy travelling the road between the Karp penal colony and the local morgue. In the middle, a truck belonging to Russia's prison service, with traffic police cars on either side. The Kremlin says the release of the body to the family has nothing to do with them, and that comments from global leaders that Vladimir Putin is responsible for Alexei Navalny's death won't hurt him and are unbecoming of them. But if they'd wanted Alexei Navalny's message to somehow die along with him, they hadn't reckoned on the resilience of his wife. Navalnaya's challenge is to unite a divided opposition, most of whom are now in exile, and to rally Navalny's frightened support base in Russia.
Without the participation of...
But other exiled activists say the West must play its role.
We deserve a platform, we deserve a voice. All we need, and we have this voice, all we need is for the West to actually listen to us, to listen to our concerns, to listen what we have to say, to provide us platform and, in some cases, shelter in the Western countries.
Yulia Navalnaya fought to save her husband when he was poisoned. She nursed him back to health and kissed him goodbye on Russian soil, with no illusions as to his likely fate. Now she takes on the fight of her life, with a force that the Kremlin's cruelty towards her family and her country has helped create. Dana Magne, Sky News, Moscow.
We can speak now to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. So, Sam, what is the UK actually doing?
Well, Rishi Sunak, who had an unusual Monday cabinet today, couldn't have been clearer. He said that actually President Putin's Russia represented an existential threat to the very foundations of the Euro-Atlantic Security Alliance, and that he must not be able to succeed. And he claimed that Putin is not winning. Now, anybody who saw what happened to Alexei Navalny on Friday, timed to coincide with the Munich Security Conference, might have something of a feeling that you could say that Putin isn't winning, but clearly all of the pushback from the West after the attempted invasion of Ukraine last year clearly isn't having a dramatic effect in curbing President Putin's behaviour. We're expecting more sanctions, harder sanctions, tough statements from the Prime Minister and Lord Cameron. It was perhaps a bit of a misstep today to have an announcement of a closure of part of a visa scheme for Ukrainians coming to the UK at the same time. Yesterday, the government made clear that they're going to extend for 18 months the time that Ukrainians fleeing can come in. But today, they made clear that in pretty short order, they're going to close the route for family members of Ukrainians to come in. It's odd timing for that announcement.
Yeah, it really is. It's something that we'll be discussing with Damien Hinds a bit later in the programme as well. You mentioned sanctions, more sanctions, tougher sanctions. Is any of this going to make any difference, do you think?
Well, that's the question they seem to be asking inside government, because all the way through last year, we were told that we were doing the toughest possible sanctions, that we were going to hit the banking sector in Russia, that we were going to really squeeze both high-value individuals and those surrounding President Putin. But that just doesn't seem to have had enough effect. And while they say more sanctions is the answer, in my conversations with Whitehall, it's actually the problem is something else. All around the world, there's a game. It's not a game. Actually, it's not a game. There is a division between those countries that are a bit more sympathetic to Putin and those who are incredibly hostile. And we do have this kind of attempt by Russia and the West to try and kind of win over those countries. Take Lord Cameron's visit to Paraguay this week. Paraguay is seen as one of our allies in the battle against Russia. But only in the last few days, Paraguay is sending a football team in the next few weeks over to Moscow to play a friendly game. Russia was banned from international friendlies after the invasion of Ukraine. You know, what side is Paraguay on? And that is a question, what side of all these different countries around the world on in relation to this conflict is something that worries. Because if you don't have support, they won't enforce the sanctions. And if sanctions aren't enforced, then there's a problem.
Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, we're joined now by the former UK National Security Advisor, Lord Ricketts. Me and Sam just saying there's no one we'd prefer to hear from on this subject, so thank you for being with us today. Was it Putin?
Well, this man was under state control. It seems very, very odd that he seemed to be in good health earlier in the week and then suddenly dead. I think we have to assume that this was the state authorities, and it wouldn't have been done without Putin's express agreement. He was the most high-profile opposition figure in Russia, so I think we have to assume, yes, Putin had this done.
It feels like a completely audacious thing to do, kind of blatant. What do you think that tells us about Putin's state of mind right now?
And the fact that it was done on the eve of the big talk fest of the Western Alliance in Munich suggests that he is defiant, he just couldn't care less about the Western reaction. I think it says that he is feeling stronger again after that strange episode last year with divisions and Prigozhin and the mutiny that was then stifled. He seems to feel he's back in control. But there's still a kind of brittleness there, I think, because why did he feel it was so essential to eliminate the only really strong opposition voice in Russia, who he'd got in jail anyway? So I think we shouldn't underestimate the fact that there have been protests by some very brave people, and there's a sense of insecurity behind all this, I think.
That's interesting, the kind of two competing things that we can draw from it.
I can't reconcile them, really.
And how has the West responded?
Well, we already have a huge array of sanctions applying on Russia after the Ukraine war. Pretty much everything in the locker has been used. I think there has been a new package being cooked up to introduce on the second anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, which is on Friday. But it's frankly more of the same, sanctions on individuals and companies. The really big one still in the locker is seizing the frozen central bank assets, which run to tens and tens of billions of euros, dollars. So far, we've been told there are all kinds of legal problems with that. David Cameron, when he came to give evidence to the committee I chair in the Lords before Christmas, did say tantalisingly there is a legal route to do this. So whether the Navalny killing will accelerate thinking about using frozen bank assets for the benefit of Ukraine, I don't know. Otherwise, we're not going to, frankly, damage Putin by any sanctions we can realistically take.
But you think the frozen assets, that could damage Putin?
I mean, that's big. You know, that's really big. It would send a very, very powerful signal. But, of course, it sets a precedent which will be uncomfortable.
How concerning are American divisions when it comes to Russia? Because it feels, doesn't it, like the Republicans in particular are getting cold feet, resistance about continuing to provide the support to Ukraine.
Yeah, I think it's deeply worrying, absolutely. For the first 2 years, America has led the way, really, with arms supplies to Ukraine and a lot of the financing. Now we're getting from Republicans a sense that this isn't really our fight. We don't have any core national interests at stake here. I think they're wrong. I think many people in Congress agree, but the House Republicans are on that track. And Donald Trump comes out with continuing weird things like today, where he seemed to somehow relate the killing of Navalny and the conditions he was held to his own treatment in the US prison system. I think the prospect, or, the shadow of Trump possibly winning is a real problem for the Ukrainians and for all of us, because if America withdrew their support, honestly, the Europeans can't substitute, particularly in the weapons, in any short time frame.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's really worrying.
It's really concerning. I can sense your kind of concern about it. As someone who's kind of, I guess, a kind of mild-mannered man in lots of ways, I can get the.
I try not to get too depressed about these things, but it has been a very effective first 2 years from the West. Now the fractures are beginning to show.
Looking at the UK, I read a very interesting section of tweets from you about Lord Cameron, about David Cameron, because sometimes I feel like in the UK we can, I guess, feel like we can't make any difference. Like, what's the point? We're just small minnow. What we do, is it going to matter? But you do think that David Cameron has made an impact in that role?
I do. He's just chalking up his 100 days in office this week. And he really hit the ground running. It's actually not a bad thing to have been Prime Minister before you become Foreign Secretary. He hit the ground running, and my goodness, the ground he's covered is extraordinary. 4 trips to the Middle East in 3 months, Washington, Kiev, now he's in the Falklands, going through the Americas. And showing up, being there, does matter in foreign affairs. You also need the ideas, and I think David Cameron's been quite clever in producing a few moves, like being prepared to recognise a Palestinian state as part of a peace process negotiation. Quite a significant little move there. And he's got the boldness to call things out and to say things as he sees them. You remember what he said to the US House Republicans about Ukraine last week, drawing parallels with 1930s appeasement. They got some pushback from them, but it was a very powerful intervention. So the self-confidence, the authority that comes from having been Prime Minister, he's really enjoying the job, and that does help British influence. The problems are still intractable, but I think we're in the engine room of diplomacy again, which is great.
OK, thank you so much. Always great to have you on the programme, Lord Ricketts there. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, teachers could be allowed to search pupils' bags under new guidance to ban mobile phones in schools in England. But with so many schools with policies already in place, is it just a distraction? Plus, an almighty row between the business secretary and the former chairman of the Post Office over what she calls disgraceful lies that the government pushed for delaying compensation to sub-postmasters. And as Conservative donor Lady McAlpine pays for a poll in the Conservative supporting newspaper The Telegraph, and it finds the Conservative Party should get rid of Rishi Sunak. We're asking, is this the famous plot, and who is pulling the strings?
Yes, so this Saturday we're planning a mass trespass to a place called Vixen Tor on Dartmoor. And near to Vixen Tor is an example of an access island. And an access island is a place where the public have a right to roam, but have to trespass to get there. And this rather absurd situation goes really to the heart of why England's access laws are broken. 20 years ago, the Countryside and Rights of Way Act gave the public a right to roam over England, but only over a partial area of England, only 8% of the country. And to some very remote and fragmented locations, parts of moorland, mountain and downland and places like that. Places that are very remote from where most people live, but also these habitats have become very fragmented through degradation over the centuries. And that's given us a very fragmented system of access as well. So what we're really calling for is for politicians to change the law in England to give the public something much more similar to what the public in Scotland have enjoyed over the last 20 years, which is a full right of responsible access to the majority of land and water in the countryside. Well, Vixen Tor has a long history of access disputes. When the current landowner bought it 20 years ago, they closed off access. It's known as the Forbidden Tor on Dartmoor. But it's really only an example of 2,500 islands, access islands, that the Right to Roam campaign has calculated exists across England. So we think it's really important that the public do have a right to access these places, but unfortunately, we have to trespass to get to them. So that's why we're organising a mass trespass this Saturday, to which over 500 people so far have currently signed up.
Hello, welcome back. Well, today the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, confirmed the government is moving ahead with a pledge to ban mobile phones in schools, although it's only guidance, and unions said that most schools already have a policy in place. In a moment, I'll be speaking to the Schools Minister, Damien Hinds, but first, here is Sky's political correspondent, Rob Powell.
Schools on, phones off.
Good morning.
This secondary in South London already bans mobile phone use, with handsets confiscated if they are seen or heard. These Year 9s say it helps focus on learning.
Using phones in break time is not really reasonable, as it's like disrupting your learning and like the pattern of the school day.
I think it's better to be in touch with like your family members just in case, because sometimes stuff can happen with buses, accidents.
If you're caught using your phone in school, there should be consequences for your actions.
Once or twice maybe my phone has went off, but teachers are reasonable. Some teachers, and I just tell you turn off the phone and put it away.
The new government guidance sets out examples of how to keep phones out. There's bringing in a complete ban where mobiles are left at home, handing in phones to school staff on arrival, forcing pupils to lock handsets away during the school day, or allowing them to keep phones with strict conditions that they are never used, seen or heard. The head here welcomed the guidelines, but said they could go further.
When we have to deal with young people and issues of mobile phones, invariably it's what's happening outside of school. This could be bullying online, or this could be other issues linked to mental health and social media. And that's why I'd really encourage all people involved in this to think again about how we can use mobile phones outside of school.
The government says 1 in 3 secondary school pupils report phones being used in most lessons without permission. A ban in England was first suggested almost 3 years ago. There are currently no blanket restrictions in Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland. Surveys suggest that, like this school, many already have rules in place around mobile phones. But this guidance does provide clarity and consistency, especially on the question of teachers being able to search pupils and the banning of phones during break times as well as during lessons. But there are broader worries. The murder of teenager Brianna Ghey highlighted dangers online after her killers were found to have accessed violent material. Brianna's mother has called for a tougher approach.
I'd like to see mobile phones specifically made for under 16s where they can't access social media sites in the first place.
Do you think the online harms bill goes far enough?
I don't think so. I don't think it does.
Oh. See how frustrating that is.
Rishi Sunak promoting the new phone rules today. Ministers have stopped short of backing a wider smartphone ban for young people, insisting new online safety laws will bring added protection. But with 97% of pupils now owning a phone by the age of 12, many worry that the law simply isn't keeping pace with modern life. Rob Powell, Sky News in South London.
We can hear now from Schools Minister Damien Hinds, who I spoke to a little earlier. Thank you so much for being on the programme this evening. So you've got more guidance on mobile phones in schools. What's the idea?
So the idea is to set the norm. Now, lots of schools, of course, already ban mobile phones. Most schools, pretty much all schools, will have some form of restrictions on mobile phones, including right up to a total ban. But we want to make sure there's a norm which includes break time and lunchtime, so that for that period in school, it's clear that there aren't mobile phones not there to distract people, but also all the other things that mobile phones bring with them. Actually, during the school day, that should be a time when you're free of that. There are lots of different ways that schools can do that. We're not being overly prescriptive about that. It can be a never seen, never heard policy, where you just have to have your phone put away in your bag, or it could be a locker, or it can be an altogether ban.
So have you changed your mind then? When you were Education Secretary back in 2018...
I knew this question was coming.
OK, there you go. Got it in, I like it. You said you didn't want to introduce a ban. You said, when people asked me if I was going to follow the example of France and impose a national ban, I said no. That's autonomy in practice. In other words, you thought head teachers should make their own decisions.
And I still think that, and head teachers will still make their own decisions. This is about solidifying a norm. We're not saying how you do this. We are saying, let's be clear with everybody, with parents, and by the way, parents tend to be pretty supportive of this, that the school day, the school premises should be free of these screens, free of these distractions. That's not the same as saying this is precisely the rule that will be followed, because head teachers rightly are in control of their school, they're in control of their behaviour policy, they're in control of discipline.
What is the point of this guidance then? If it is guidance, and if it includes everything from a complete ban to saying that children can keep their phones on them as long as they don't look at them,
we're not using them. No, not using them. So we know from survey data, including from surveys.
That's already happening, isn't it? 80%. Of schools, according to a Teacher Tap poll, banned phones altogether during the school day. Only 1% kids can use them whenever they like.
Well, of course, children aren't going to be allowed to use phones during lessons when they're supposed to be concentrating, but there is still a lot of other time in school, including, and I think this point about break times and lunch times is very important. But we also know from surveys of children, so surveys we do in the National Behaviour Survey, also international surveys done by, for example, the OECD, that children themselves do say that there are these distractions happening during the school day. Not most children, not in most places, but where that is the case, we want to make sure that norm is there and that schools are calm, ordered places where everyone can concentrate on learning.
I'm just struggling, I guess, to work out, again, if most schools are already doing this and it's not compulsory, and teachers have the powers to do things like, search pupils for things like mobile phones, because you gave them those powers in 2011. Yeah. What is the point of this, other than to get a free headline?
Sophie, there are many things that happen in lots of places but don't happen in all places. That doesn't mean that you assume that there isn't an issue to be tackled. What we're doing is changing.
So you're not ordering them to change them.
No, and we don't go around ordering people to do things unnecessarily. We have a system with a lot of autonomy, rightly, at the individual school level for individual head teachers and for their board of governors or trustees. But we also have certain norms that operate in our system, certain minimum set of subjects that should be studied. Uniform is pretty much universal. All of these things are norms. They are still up to schools to have an individual policy or how they address parts of the curriculum and an individual uniform policy. But there is that overall position, overall framework, and there's clarity for everybody. I think one of the things, what today's announcement does, it sort of shifts the centre of gravity on this debate to say that is the norm, that is what you should expect. As you say, a lot of schools, most schools will do this to some degree anyway. Some do it to a very, very strong degree. But everywhere we should be expecting this to happen, and as I say, including during break time and lunchtime.
Last week, I interviewed Esther Jai, the mother of Rihanna Jai, the transgender teenager who was killed in an awful way that I know that it's impacted everyone reading that, what happened there. And she said, look, you know, phones in schools isn't the real issue here. The problem is what happens outside of schools. People feel, she said, that there's no safe place because you just carry a phone around 24/7, there's no escape. Does the government need to be tougher on social media and mobile phone use across the board for young people?
Look, we do need to be tougher, and we are being tougher. I mean, the Online Safety Act, which of course has recently come into law and is now being enacted in stages by Ofcom, is precisely that, and prioritising, first of all, illegal content that appears in social media and other user-generated contexts, things like pornography, but also other types of content which can be harmful to children. And social media companies are going to have to do a lot more in terms of how they regulate that, a lot more in terms of enforcing their... I mean, typically they do have minimum ages on those sites already, but they need to be much tougher in how they enforce it and be clear about how they're doing that and about how they're making sure that children are being duly protected.
I mean, Esther, doesn't think that the online harms bill goes far enough. She says she's calling for more drastic measures, like banning social media apps for under-16s.
Yes, and look, I've said this before, I said it in Parliament the other day. I mean, I think what Esther J has done since this most unthinkable, unspeakable tragedy that has happened to her is use her energy and her advocacy, if you like, to start some really important public debates. And just for the avoidance of doubt, I really, really welcome that. I think it is important to also say that technology does bring with it some good things. Even social media brings with it some good things too. For some people, perhaps who are not in traditional friendship groups, who manage to find other people like them and they form types of relationships and types of bonding in that way. But I think it's also true, and I think a lot of parents up and down the country watching this would say right now that young people spend a lot of time on phones, and there are a lot of healthy things that can get crowded out to some extent by that.
I want to just talk a little bit about foreign affairs, if I may as well, and get your reaction to the death of the Putin critic, Alexei Navalny. Many people, of course, suspecting the hand of Putin here. I'm sure you're limited in what you can say on that. Rishi Sunak has expressed outrage, but is there anything we can actually do? Is this exposing the limits of our soft power?
Well, look, clearly it's a dark day. It's a dark day for Russia, a dark day for Europe, dark day for the world. Here was a fierce and strong proponent, advocate for democracy, and a great figurehead in that regard. And of course, as the Foreign Secretary said, Putin has to be held accountable. Now, we and allies will of course always act together, and already, of course, there are very, very many, I think 1,900 individuals and entities already sanctioned in connection with Russia. We will work together always with our allies. We also, by the way, don't advertise in advance things like sanctioning of new individuals for obvious reasons.
That makes sense. I guess one thing that we could do is to really enforce our wholehearted support for Ukraine in the war with Russia. And yet, one thing that the UK government's decided to do today is to pull back on parts of its Homes for Ukraine scheme, cutting the length of time refugees can stay here for, closing the family scheme. I mean, that's not a good look, is it? Why are you doing that?
Well, we are absolutely standing with Ukraine in many, many ways. There has been, of course, as you rightly say, the Homes programme, but also more directly in terms of support and aid to the Ukrainian government. And Ukraine's struggle is, in so many ways, all of our struggle for free Europe. Well, look, as I say, we continue to stand with Ukraine, and as you know, there are many Ukrainians, rightly, who are here and are being part of that scheme. Obviously, all things evolve over time; all things are kept under review. But our resolve and our partnership of working with Ukraine is absolutely undiminished.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, let's bring in our duo for tonight, the former Labour Minister Caroline Flint and the chair of the Education Select Committee, Conservative MP Robin Walker. Robin, what's your take on this? Is the government going far enough?
So I think in terms of the change in the guidance to toughen the ban on mobile phones in schools, that is a sensible step. I think it's one that, as a select committee, we've been partway through an inquiry looking at screen time, and I think we would have recommended this had the government not preempted us. So I welcome that. In terms of social media, I think they need to go further, and I think there is ample evidence of the mental health risks of children spending too much time on social media and some of the serious grooming risks that we see in the online world as well, which we're having a session to look into in more detail tomorrow. I think all of this leads us to think that there need to be much greater controls on that, but we need to be realistic. But teenagers are going to try and use these elements, and so therefore it needs to be about how we police the companies, how we make sure that sensible age verification is set up for social media companies, and we enforce that through the law, through things like the Online Safety Bill, but potentially going further in the future, rather than simply resting on this one issue. But in terms of the issue in schools, I think there are good behavioural reasons to have the ban on mobile phones in school times. There are also good reasons in terms of academic attainment and concentration. One of the more worrying pieces of evidence we were presented with as a committee is that one notification appearing on a child's mobile phone during a lesson could distract them for 20 minutes of that lesson. That's half the lesson gone. And so that level of distraction really isn't needed. At a time when we're focused on catch-up, I think it's right to make sure that the phones are put away.
I mean, I know how distracting I find my own mobile phone.
We're all guilty of it.
I am guilty of it. I am guilty of it as well. We're talking a bit about, the age verification, and it does feel that, OK, they might have age limits like the 13. You have to be 13 to use most social networks. But is it really enforced? Do people obey it? Caroline, what's your take on all this?
I think it's down to the internet companies. I mean, in the real world, we have age verification in lots of different forms to protect our young people. And if we expect that to happen properly in the real world, it should be happening in the virtual world. And I don't believe that these companies cannot do this. I think they just have been really slow to really pick up on the harm that is being done to our young people from an early age, but right through their teens. And they should step up. And I think there's all sorts of things that it's really, really frightening, not just worrying, frightening about the sort of access very young people have. And I know there's an age sort of set at 13. I think that should go up to 16. And that's not to say that, our children shouldn't be encouraged to know how to use the computers, how to be self-reliant and be able to cope with things as they get older. But I think the pendulum has swung too far in an open sort of approach to this that is resulting in really damaging effects on our young people and children. And they take it into adulthood. That's the awful thing. This is not something that stops at the age of 16. If they harm, they can take that into their adulthood as well.
I feel quite lucky that social media wasn't a thing when I was.
Well, I'm so glad I didn't have to deal with some of this. It was hard enough being a parent then.
What specifically would you like the government to be doing? You're saying that they're not going far enough in relation to social media more widely.
Well, I mean, I was one of those who supported measures which we have now got into the Online Safety Bill to say that actually we need to be able to get serious about sanctions on social media executives if they don't take action on these issues. I think we need to look more down that line. But this is something we're in the process of conducting an inquiry on, so I don't want to preempt the decisions that the Select Committee might reach on the basis of the evidence that we're yet to hear. What I do think is that this is becoming a much bigger issue. Mental health in schools is a bigger issue than it's ever been before, and there's no doubt that this is contributing to it. So we need to look at how we solve that.
I think policymakers and politicians and across parties have to get wise up about what potential negative outcomes of these new technologies. AI is another example, and deep, fakes and things like this. But I think, it was like this brave new world. It's going to be great. We can avoid this. And there's wonderful things through access to the internet. It can be a very democratic contribution because for countries where, you are prevented from hearing what's going on, Russia is a good example, the internet can open up a world to you. But I think we've been too slow, and I think, government has got to speed up what it does on this front.
Yeah, it's almost like the legislation kind of catching up with
Yeah,
the pace of
absolutely. We've got to be
technology.
at least 10 steps ahead.
Well, I think also governments everywhere in the world have been in a rush to embrace digital technologies
sure.
and not necessarily always fought through all the risks of that. And one of the things that's interesting to see UNESCO, who are one of the first organisations to push digital technology in education, now saying that actually they think we need to look at limiting children's screen time, limiting the impact of digital devices. So that shift is happening.
We could talk about this all night, but we are out of time on this discussion. We'll have lots more from the panel coming up. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, has come out fighting in response to claims at the weekend that the government pushed the Post Office to stall compensation for sub-postmasters, telling the Commons it's patently untrue. That's next. Hello, welcome back. Now, Kemi Badenoch came out swinging today in the Commons, responding to claims made by the former chairman of the Post Office that he was urged to stall compensation for stub postmasters. The Business Secretary said that Henry Staunton's account was patently untrue. She also said his behaviour showed she was right to have sacked him. Sky's business correspondent Adele Robinson reports.
See it for what it was, a blatant attempt to seek revenge following dismissal.
The Business Secretary's defence amid an escalating row over the government's approach to the Post Office scandal.
What tone today will send to the sub-postmasters? I'll say this, it's more cover-up, more ossification, it's just more of the same we've seen over many, many years.
This is the political point scoring which I talked about earlier, which we just need to stop. He is, rather than focus on the issue, he's talking about my tweeting. I think maybe he should get off Twitter and actually listen to what I'm saying.
It's after accusations of attempts to delay victim payouts ahead of an election. And now a war of words. On one side, Henry Staunton, former Post Office chair, sacked last month, who made the claims. On the other, Kemi Badenoch. Mr Staunton's told Sky News he's standing by his accusations.
A public appointment process was underway.
Watching and questioning the government's delivery on promises, lawyer David Enright for the victims, nearly 6 weeks on from the announcement of a blanket quashing of convictions.
It was a knee-jerk reaction to a TV drama. Rather than sit down and come up with a plan as to what to do, they announced that effectively there were going to be 2 Christmases this year, and we all know there's only going to be one. The government failed to consult with the Ministry of Justice, it failed to consult with the judiciary. It just came out and made an announcement which got it out of a very tight hole.
VJ had his conviction overturned in 2021 and qualifies for a £600,000 payout, but says that isn't even half of what he lost.
They need to get rid of these people who are looking at the compensation schemes and get independent people to come and have a look at our claims and let them sort out the paperwork. You can't put a price on this scandal, tell you the truth. How do you calculate 16 years of your life gone down the drain?
The government's under pressure to protect their reputation.
Hence the decision to release documents supporting their denials. But it's still at a time when the public perception exists widely that there has been a lack of transparency on this scandal on a political level for years.
And still, concerns over a lack of urgency.
We need to get on with the legislation. We need to speed up the compensation scheme so people get redress. We also need to ensure that we don't just take the word of the Secretary of State that Henry Staunton is lying. She has to come out and actually explain why in detail.
There's a risk victims are getting lost in a political drama. And the view from campaigners so far, there are more words than actions. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Well, in a statement this evening, responding to the Business Secretary, Mr Staunton's lawyers said Mr Staunton is not in the habit of resorting to fabrication or invention and decided to go public out of a desire to ensure that the public were fully aware of the facts surrounding the multiple failures that have led to postmasters in this country being badly let down. That statement there for lawyers for Mr Staunton. Now, Westminster watchers love gossip, intrigue and plots. And at the moment, the Conservatives are really spoiling us. The latest in the backbiting is a poll published in the Sunday Telegraph, which carried a poll saying 8 in 10 former Conservative voters think the party would have a better chance of winning the election if they changed leader, again, to someone who embraces traditional Conservative values. Now, the poll, carried out by Whitestone Insight, was commissioned by the long-standing party supporter Lady McAlpine, who joins us now. Great to have you on the show.
Right, I hope it's good to be here.
Yeah. So, first things first, what does the poll show? What's it all about?
Well, I just wanted to know what voters really think. I'm very old, I'm very angry. And so what we've got is quite a surprising result, because we asked people if they'd voted Conservative or whatever they voted before, what would they vote next time? And most of them were saying they weren't going to vote. And then we said, if you had a choice of a different leader, how would you vote? We got a surprising result in that we gave them X, Y, and Z, as it were. And in fact, X was the most right wing, and they were the one. That was the one. 90%, I think, said they would go for a more right-wing leader.
So the polling effectively, in your view, shows that Conservative voters, former Conservative voters, want a more right-wing,
they want a more conservative values,
whatever that means.
They also want less of a nanny state. They want to go back to allowing people to actually make a living for themselves or choose what they're doing. And we don't want to be told what gender we are or what gender somebody else is. So much money is now being wasted on nonsense things like gender and climate change and, you know.
So you describe yourself as very old and very angry.
Yeah.
You paid for this poll, did you then? Why did you do that?
Because I wanted to know what we were doing. I knew that the Conservative Party itself was rotten at the core. There's been something going on I started looking at it in 1910 and thinking there's something really bad going on here. And so I've just been watching them stab people in the back, watching people being manipulated. So Boris got well and truly hung by his own people, or what should have been his own people.
So do you think that Rishi Sunak should lead the Conservatives into the next election?
Well, if he does, we certainly won't win. And I'm absolutely convinced that, well, it's not just me. This poll showed, because eventually it was choose between names, and if we got Boris back, there's a fair chance, at least we'd get the Conservative voters back. And I think, if nothing else, the Nadine Dorries book has actually proved that Boris didn't lie. He wasn't breaking rules. And if what she's saying is not true, why haven't they all taken her to court?
So what is going on here?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it feels like, there's lots of talks about plots.
Yeah.
There's lots of polls in the Telegraph that have been effectively used to, I guess, trash Rishi Sunak, to say that he should be more like Reform, more like Nigel Farage. Is there a plot, and are you part of it?
No, I'm not part of anything. I'm totally independent. I'm not even a political animal. I really,
Oh, come on, you're a bit of a political animal.
No, I'm not. As I say, I'm just angry. And I love my country, and I hate to see it going to the dogs. And I hate to see, we've got far, far too many people coming in freeloading. We're paying too many English people, British people, to sit on their backsides and not work. I mean, the whole thing is just nonsense. We need a good shake-up. Look at the NHS.
I mean, some people would say, you're a big fan of Boris Johnson. Some people, I guess, would say that, look, Boris Johnson's poll ratings weren't anything to write home about by the end either.
Well, no, but we know now why, because they were really well manipulated. I mean, there is a seriously nasty, I don't know, a mafia, as it were, somewhere. OK, it sounds... Somebody's going to say, oh, she's been at the drink. I haven't. I couldn't even get a drink this evening. No, but seriously, it's really bizarre, because it does read... I mean, that book was called The Plot, with good reason.
OK.
And it actually shows what's been going on for a long time. And it's gradually got worse.
Fascinating to talk to you. Thank you very much for being on the programme to talk about the poll that you had commissioned. Right, let's bring in our panellists, shall we? Caroline Flint and Robin Walker. Robin, I've got to go to you first. You were expecting this, I'm sure. What do you make of what Lady McAlpine's had to say?
I think it reflects the views of some supporters or former supporters of the party, but I don't think it reflects the strategy for winning a general election, and I don't think it reflects the political reality. But in order to win a general election, you need to, yes, try and bring together some of the people who voted for you last time, but you also need to appeal to people across the political spectrum. And representing, as I have for the last 13 years, a seat that I won off the Labour Party that was constantly contested and is politically contested. What I do not hear on the doorstep is widespread calls for a big move rightwards or a restoration of former leaders. What I hear is that people want to see us delivering. They want to see us focusing on issues like inflation, like the cost of living, and actually those are the issues on which the Prime Minister is focused.
Caroline, it feels like you've seen the ebb and flow of the Labour Party, if I put it like that.
Over 45 years.
Over 45 years. Do you recognise what's going on in the Conservative Party, right now? As I guess, you've known the opposition, you know what it's like to kind of lose power.
Yeah, I think political parties that aren't united, and that doesn't mean that everyone is best friends within it, but when you just have a display of disunity that really is, cutting your party into pieces, and particularly your parliamentary party, then that's a recipe for disaster. And, I look, there's always been conspiracies. There've always been fan clubs for different individuals who seek to lead the country. But the truth is that since 2019, Boris Johnson won a stomping majority. But he has to hold responsibility for why, in a relatively short space of time, he actually lost the plot a bit in terms of what was happening.
What do you want to come? No, I don't agree with that, because I don't think he didn't stand a chance. I think that, definitely there was a lot of help to get him where he was, and his charisma was what actually got the 80-seat majority. Then he got us out of Europe, which I think is wonderful, but then we got COVID. And all the plans were just put on hold. All the money was spent on COVID. Whether it was spent rightly or wrongly, none of us know, because we'd never had COVID before.
But he also isn't necessarily what I would call a traditional Conservative leader. He actually spent a huge amount of money when he became Prime Minister. And to be honest, I actually think Boris Johnson is more socially liberal than he might like to appear. He's not your traditional Tory leader.
Can I ask about the current Tory leader? Would you vote for Rishi Sunak at the election?
No, I didn't vote him in the first place.
But would you vote for him at the general election?
No.
You wouldn't vote Conservative under his leadership?
I would have real trouble, because I don't think he's right as a Prime Minister, full stop. And I think what's happening under him is wrong. You know, taxes are going up. Everything's going the wrong way. He obviously, he's not done anything. We've got out of Europe, but we're still allowing Europe to tell us what to do in so many ways. Sorry, that really rankles. No, I don't think he's a good Prime Minister.
What would you say to that?
I disagree. I think he's a good Prime Minister. He's focused on the issues that we need to focus on as a country. And I think actually when he's focused on issues like tackling immigration and delivering on reducing inflation, these are absolutely the priorities that I'm hearing from people on the doorsteps. I have to say, I mean, interesting, you criticising the party for trying to deal with climate change. That was one of Boris Johnson's issues he championed.
No. I'm just saying, as a voter,
I do think it's
I don't see it as a priority.
OK, brilliant, interesting conversation. Thank you very much for coming on the programme, Lady McAlpine. Coming up on the Politics Hub, Tony Blair famously never had a mobile phone. Boris Johnson lost his passcode. Nicola Sturgeon purged hers. And Rishi Sunak upgraded his. We're talking politics of mobile phones. That's next.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Lisa Dowd, and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president, and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, is back-breaking work. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Hello, welcome back. Now, if you're above a certain age, you can probably remember a time before the mobile phone and the excitement when they came out. Now, the younger members of the Politics Hub team rolled their eyes in an editorial discussion about this earlier, but phones have transformed the way that politics is played. Oh, so nostalgic. I absolutely love it. I love it. I remember my phone, my Nokia with my snake. Great days. No social media, no drama.
No drama, no drama. So I beat that a bit in terms of my technology in that, and it's a leap year. It's
Right.
29th of February next week. So back in 2000, I actually proposed to my now husband using the fax machine.
Using the fax
Yeah,
machine?
I sent him a fax.
You sent him a fax?
I sent him a fax with a little cartoon and sort of, will you marry on me? Because obviously women on leap year day are allowed to do that. And then he replied to my pager. You know,
I love this.
saying-
This is amazing.
Basically, he actually
This is
didn't agree. He said,
amazing.
is this a wind-up? That was his first statement before he did agree to it. In fact, I think he sent me a return fax with yes, yes, yes at the bottom of it. But
That's actually quite sweet. I love it.
There you go. Very retro.
I love
Benefits of slow communication.
With the
I
pages,
can't
that's
compete
great.
with that story, but I remember my first phone when I was at university, and I remember a friend rang me up on it to say, can you get me a Big Mac for supper? I picked up the message a week later, so I hope he wasn't too hungry.
I still remember Facebook coming out. I was at uni as well, and it's kind of just transforming everything. Do we think it's a problem now with how we use mobile phones in Westminster? WhatsApp groups and all that stuff?
It's problematic because fundamentally things get put on there which then get shared with everybody, and so I think what people have to realise that it's very easy to spread a message around the world from a couple of clicks of a button, and therefore you should just assume anything you put on a phone is going to be public.
And I do remember sort of in the early days of email, even before I was an MP, I can remember when I worked for a trade union, I won't say who, but a certain trade union leader answered to a colleague's email, and it was really, he hadn't thought it through when he sent that. And so we used to sort of have a bit of a filter or a check when you email, and I still now read my emails and before I click them off. It's like that with these WhatsApp groups. People have no filter.
It's got to be dangerous. Thank you so much for a really lively debate today. Much appreciated. That's it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7.